Well, for more on the battle over the budget in Washington, I'm joined by Illinois Senator Richard Durbin. He's the chamber's #2 ranked Democrat and a member of the so-called bipartisan gang of 6 lawmakers that are ironing out a deficit reduction plan. The senator, by the way, is also leading the fight against banks to cap the fees they charge on credit and debit card transactions. Good morning, Senator. Great to have you with us.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So before we talk about this bank fee fight, essentially, let me talk about the fight on the Hill over the budget. Are we going to get a deal cut before April 8th?
Well, we need to. I think that both on the Democratic and Republican side, we've run out of our appetite for these 2- and 3-week budgets. It's a terrible way to run a government or a nation. We need to agree. The president needs to be at the table, and I think we can do it. But let's understand, we are not going to balance the budget in the next 6 months. If we're serious about it, really serious about it, we put everything on the table and we speak about 5 and 10 years. Having a plan that really moves, as the Bowles-Simpson Commission did, toward $4 trillion in reduction in national debt. That would send a very positive message about America's future.
But for this current fiscal year, for this budget that we're talking about, then, is the magic number $30 billion in cuts, or what?
Well, it's gone back and forth. We've come up with about $51 billion in cuts in the Senate. The House has come up with $100 billion in cuts.
Right.
Unfortunately, in Washington, after all of the speeches and all the principles have been enunciated, it usually is a split the difference. I hope that we don't cut too deeply in domestic discretionary programs like education, research, and investment in America's infrastructure. Those are things that need to be invested in now if we're going to move this economy forward.
But I think Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid has said, though, that no compromise is going to include any cut in Social Security. Is that going to be the case?
Harry Reid is addressing the longer-term budget outlook, not just the next 6 months. And certainly from my point of view, we must be honest about Social Security. It doesn't add 1 penny to the deficit. It's a separate fund. And secondly, untouched by Congress and the president, it's going to make every promised payment with a cost of living adjustment until 2037. You can't say that about any other program.
But everything's eventually going to be on the table.
Well, I think ultimately what we're hearing in a bipartisan sentiment in the House and Senate is to put everything on the table. Let's have a grown-up discussion. Let's understand people are going to have to share some of the burden of getting this accomplished. If we do that, I think we can move America's economy forward and really have more confidence in where we're going.
Chances of a government shutdown?
I think they're possible, but not likely.
What's possible to you?
Well, what's possible is an agreement with the president and the leaders in Congress within the next 2 weeks. That's what we absolutely should do to make certain that we don't lurch from 2 to 3 weeks.
But you're saying it's a possibility we might see a shutdown.
It's always possible. But I think that the Speaker Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House, feels as strongly as the Democrats that he doesn't want to bear the responsibility of a shutdown.
Okay, Senator, let me just switch gears now and talk to you about this fight that you're leading to cap the credit and debit card transactions.
It's only debit.
Oh, just debit card transactions.
That's right.
Then. Some are saying that this is not helpful to the consumers, and in fact, this is only going to allow the banks to then raise fees on other services that they charge. Why don't you just want to study this a little bit more?
Well,
instead of pushing it through.
We have had at least 7, maybe 9 congressional hearings on this, 3 different studies. The attempt to delay the Federal Reserve issuing a rule on the interchange fee is an attempt to make certain that these credit card companies and banks can continue to receive $1.3 billion a month in interchange fees that they impose on merchants and consumers. In terms of the consumer side of this equation, the Consumer Federation of America, which is the preeminent spokesman for consumers, endorses the Durbin Amendment. So to say it's not going to help consumers, I'm afraid they believe otherwise, and I do too.
But Senator, I mean, if they're only going to, let's say, collect that $1.3 billion, not in these service fees, but not in these debit service fees, but in other ways, let's say taking away the free checking accounts, that sort of thing, then how does that actually end up helping the consumer?
Guess what? We're at their mercy anyway. If they decide to raise fees, and they always do, they're going to do it, whether this amendment passes or not. Here's what's unfair about this amendment. The credit card companies through the banks impose a charge on every debit card transaction. Federal Reserve said it's about 44 cents a transaction. Next time you go to LaGuardia and you see the person in front of you at the cashier with a debit card buying a little package of gum for $1.29, think about 44 cents of that transaction going directly to the bank and how much that retailer is making out of it, how much the gum costs because of it. The fact is, if you believe
But can you actually say that consumers will see lower prices benefits from it. It helps the retailers.
I'll tell you why I think they do.
consumers.
Because when it comes down to retailers, there's real competition. When it comes to credit card companies, Visa and MasterCard, there's no competition. And when it comes to these banks, they're imposing this fee, price fixing, without any bargaining, without any negotiation with the merchants or even the consumers.
Senator, let me just read you. This is from Chicago Tribune. They wrote an editorial a few days ago. So your own home state newspaper says, quote, federal lawmakers need to accept that the Durbin Amendment will do little for consumers apart from forcing banks to invent annoying new fees. The only thing better than delaying this government effort to micromanage the business world would be repealing it altogether.
I disagree with him, and I'll tell you why I disagree with him. If this were a negotiated fee between the merchant, whether it's a big box store or a convenience store or the gas station or a restaurant, that's one thing, but it's not. It is imposed upon them, and the Federal Reserve says the average interchange fee on debit card transactions, 44 cents every time you use it. The actual cost to the bank, less than 12 cents. They have driven this up to 44 cents. There is absolutely no way that a merchant or consumer has any bargaining power. That's why we want the Federal Reserve to establish a reasonable proportional fee.
Okay. Senator, just quickly, because we are going to hear from the president tonight on Libya. Can we afford another war in Libya?
We could not afford another war like Iraq or Afghanistan, but the president's made it clear that won't be the case. He said no ground troops, short duration. We're involved in a collective effort here with the Arab League and the United Nations. The president, I think, is trying to redefine America's role in foreign policy, particularly as it relates to these Arab and Muslim nations. I think he's done the right thing, the right approach, but he needs to spell it out to Congress, and we need to exercise our constitutional responsibility to vote on it.
Should he have sought congressional approval before committing troops?
We left town. We were out of town. We left town as he was making this decision. Under the law, the War Powers Act, he has to report it within 48 hours. When we return today, we can take it up even this week, and we should.
Senator, thank you very much for stopping by.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. That was Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois.